people, you know. I was the obedient girl that seemed to be, you know, if I would, the one thing that I did is to rebel was I knew I could write. Now, and I had this aunt who had worked on the Tennessean, which is a very fine newspaper at the time in Nashville, and my father seemed to, all the girls my age were generally in the 50s, they were going to school going to education classes to be teachers, or they were majoring in home economics, which was, you know, a course in cooking and sewing and all that kind of thing, and the economics of housekeeping. I don't mean to disdain it, but that were the two things that women did in very large groups in the 50s. Not all of them did, but a great many of them did.
So do you think these role models available to you?
Yeah, very often. My role models were my aunts and my stepmother. They were, because they were people who were getting things done in the world. And my father thought I should take shorthand. And he said, you could be an executive secretary. And I said, I don't want to spend my life writing other people's letters. But since he had a daughter, he had a sister who was a journalist, he could understand at least a little bit about why I wanted to be a journalist. And there were fewer young women in journalism then, and you know, it was something I wanted to do.
It's interesting when Carolyn came to campus at ACC with her last book. I think that was your last book. Wasn't that your last one?
Yeah.
And it was interesting to me to see the young women listening to you. And I mentioned this to you. I don't know if you noticed it or not, but they had a very strong reaction to you. Because they were looking at you as a role model,
yeah,
you know, for that.
Well, I've been fortunate in many ways.
Yeah. But, you know, comment about that. Do you find yourself being a role model for...
Well, I don't teach at the university anymore, and so it's a little hard to say, but I try to help other young women who are writers and who are interested in writing. Yeah.
Do you feel like you've been held back at some point in your life, just like the character in the story?
Were you held back at some point in your life, like the character in the story?
Not really. I was rebellious enough to go ahead and do what I wanted to. And I knew, as I said, I knew I could write. That's a funny thing, you know. You learn that sometimes when you're fairly young, that you have certain proclivities. That there are some things you can do that interest you. You begin to know that. It's always seemed to me that boys had a worse time with that than young women did. Because my brother, he tried many things, and he didn't seem to like any of them very much. He worked for the National Park Service. He worked for a veterinarian. He worked in many different odd jobs, and none of them seemed to fit. So what he needed was he loved outdoors. He wanted to be outdoors. That's where everything interesting was, as far as he was concerned. And and ranching does give you a lot of freedom in a certain way. Of course, you're bound by the economics of it and all that kind of thing. But he was fortunate in that my mother had this small place. She could let him have it lease free. He didn't have to pay rent, you might say. And But then gradually, as he got more successful, he was leasing other ranches because he needed more room for cattle.